I remember the day we moved into our new house like it was yesterday. My wife, Karen, and I had finally escaped the cramped chaos of city living for a quieter, more spacious life in the suburbs. The house was a modest, two-story home nestled on a tree-lined street, surrounded by a neat lawn and an overgrown garden that promised both charm and mystery. The neighbors assured us it was a safe area, a place where you could leave your door unlocked without a second thought. Yet, from the moment we stepped in, an inexplicable unease began to stir. The first week was filled with the usual excitement and exhaustion of moving. We unpacked boxes, rearranged furniture, and set up our lives in this new space. I was particularly drawn to the backyard, a wild little garden that held an assortment of old statues. There was a weathered stone angel, a regal lion, and several other sculptures that had clearly seen better days. Karen loved the character they added, claiming they gave the garden an old-world feel. I, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A few days after settling in, while I was trimming the hedges near the garden, I noticed that the stone angel's face, which had always looked serene and gentle, now seemed to be turned away from the house. I paused, wiping sweat from my brow, and looked again. Sure enough, where once the statue had gazed lovingly toward our new home, it now stared blankly in the opposite direction. I dismissed it as a trick of the light or my tired eyes playing games with me. After all, we had been through so much change lately, and my mind was racing with worry about our finances and the stress of starting over. That evening, as Karen and I sat down to dinner, I tried to mention it. "Did you notice anything strange about the garden today?" I asked tentatively. She merely smiled and said, "The statues always look different in the morning light. Don't worry about it." But deep down, I wasn't convinced. I felt as if the house itself was watching me, its every corner brimming with silent secrets. The next morning, I found myself staring out the living room window, watching the garden in the soft glow of dawn. My heart skipped a beat when I saw that not only had the angel statue completely reversed its position, but the lion now appeared to be tilted, as if it had been nudged. I ran outside, my footsteps crunching on the dew-soaked grass, and inspected the statues up close. They were heavy, immovable objects that I was certain had not been disturbed during our move. Yet there they were, as if repositioned by an unseen hand. I tried to hide my worry from Karen. I mentioned it casually, attributing it to my overactive imagination, but I could tell from the way she avoided my gaze that she, too, had sensed something unusual. Over the following days, the strange occurrences became more frequent. I would catch fleeting glimpses of movement near the garden's edge, and sometimes at night, when I glanced out the window, I'd see shadows dancing among the trees. Then, one crisp autumn evening, things took a darker turn. After a long day of work and a quiet dinner together, Karen and I retired early. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to a soft, eerie sound, a slow, deliberate scraping noise coming from outside. Groggy and disoriented, I peered through the curtains. The backyard was bathed in moonlight, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure moving among the statues. I couldn't tell if it was a person or just my imagination fueled by exhaustion. The following morning, I discovered something that sent shivers down my spine. In the center of the garden, right where the stone angel once stood proudly, was a small patch of disturbed soil and fresh footprints. They were large and irregular, almost as if someone had been dragging something heavy across the ground. Karen, who was busy tending to the flowers, looked up when I called her over. We examined the prints together, our hearts pounding in unison. The police were called, but with little evidence beyond the footprints and our own accounts, there was nothing they could do, just a promise to increase patrols in the neighborhood. Days turned into a week, and though the police presence reassured some of our neighbors, the unsettling feeling in our home only deepened for us. One Saturday morning, as I was fixing breakfast, I noticed something even more disturbing. Etched into the wall of our back porch were words spray painted in thick, black letters, "Leave now." My hands trembled as I called Karen. Over. We stood in silence, the reality of the message sinking in. Who would do such a thing? And why target our home? That day, I tried to convince myself it was the work of vandals, perhaps some local troublemakers or misguided teenagers. Yet, deep inside, I couldn't help but think it was more than that. The house had a history that we knew nothing about. There were whispered rumors among the neighbors about strange occurrences in the old home, but we had dismissed them as local folklore. Not long after the graffiti incident, our lives took an even darker turn. One chilly evening, while I was checking the security cameras we had hastily installed around the property, a decision born of fear rather than genuine concern, I noticed something on one of the feeds that made my blood run cold. In the grainy footage, a figure in a dark hoodie could be seen lingering by the garden at the edge of the property. The figure moved slowly and deliberately, almost as if they were studying the statues. I rewound the video several times, certain that I wasn't mistaken. The figure was real, and they were watching us. I shared the footage with Karen, and we spent the rest of that night in a tense silence, eyes fixed on the screen and the live feed, too afraid to sleep. The next day, I went door to door in the neighborhood, trying to gather any information about the mysterious figure, but everyone seemed as puzzled as we were. Some shrugged it off, suggesting it might be a local urban legend come to life. Others claimed they had seen nothing unusual, despite the odd happenings around our house. As days passed without further incidents, a fragile sense of normalcy began to return. The garden, though still harboring its unsettling statues, gradually lost its air of menace, and we started to hope that perhaps the worst was over. But fate had one more twist in store for us. It was on a rainy, overcast weekend that I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood, hoping to clear my mind. I strolled past familiar houses and neatly trimmed lawns, all the while feeling the weight of the unresolved mystery of our own home. When I returned, however, the front door was ajar. My heart pounded as I stepped inside cautiously. The house was in disarray, drawers were open, and personal items were scattered on the floor as if someone had rifled through our belongings. It was as if the intruder had been looking for something specific, but nothing valuable was missing. It felt like an invasion of our sanctuary, a deliberate act meant to unsettle us. Karen was visibly shaken when I recounted what I had found. We called the police once again, but this time, they took our concerns more seriously. They conducted a thorough search, but as if the intruder had vanished into thin air, no one was found, and no fingerprints or clear evidence remained. The officers advised us to be extra cautious and to document anything out of the ordinary. They mentioned that sometimes people with psychological issues or even someone with a grudge might be responsible, but nothing seemed to fit any profile. In the weeks that followed, life in our house became a constant battle between normalcy and paranoia. We installed additional cameras, changed the locks, and even considered moving, but the thought of leaving our new home, a place we had dreamed of for so long, was heart-wrenching. Every night, I lay awake listening for sounds that might indicate someone was lurking in the shadows, and every morning, I found myself checking the garden, half expecting to see the statues rearranged once more or to catch a glimpse of that mysterious figure. Then, one fateful evening, everything changed. It was nearly dark, and a dense fog had rolled in, blanketing the neighborhood in an eerie silence. Karen and I were having a quiet dinner when we suddenly heard soft, rhythmic tapping at the window. I glanced up, and in the dim light, I saw a pair of eyes staring back at me from across the street. The sight was so sudden and surreal that I nearly dropped my fork. The eyes disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only the sound of the rain tapping on the glass. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light or my imagination running wild, but a lingering dread settled over me. That night, the tapping returned, this time at the front door. Karen, normally the more courageous of the two of us, insisted we lock every door and window, even though we had already taken every precaution. We huddled together in the living room, the security cameras our only solace as we listened to the soft, persistent knocks echoing through the house. After what felt like hours, the knocking stopped abruptly. We waited in tense silence until the early hours of the morning before we finally drifted into a fitful sleep. When we awoke, the house was quiet again, but the memories of that night were seared into our minds. Over time, the terrifying episodes gradually diminished. The graffiti never reappeared, and the intrusions ceased as mysteriously as they had begun. Yet, the shadow of those events lingered like a dark cloud over our home. I often find myself pausing by the window, glancing at the garden where the statues stand in silent vigil, and wondering if they are watching over us, or if they are a warning of something still lurking just beyond our sight. Even now, years later, I haven't found an explanation that satisfies me. The police case went cold, and the mysterious figure on the security camera remains an unsolved enigma. I've learned to live with the uncertainty, though the memory of those unsettling nights still sends a chill down my spine. Our home, which was meant to be a sanctuary, will always hold a secret of silent watchers, inexplicable movements, and the terror of not knowing who, or what, might be coming next. I share this story not just as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder that sometimes, the very place where we seek refuge can harbor the darkest mysteries. Even in a neighborhood known for its safety and warmth, shadows can creep in, and the things we cannot explain may forever haunt the corners of our lives. My wife, Jordan, and I had been dreaming of a fresh start for years. When the opportunity arose to leave our cramped city apartment behind, we eagerly packed our lives into boxes and set out for a new home in the wide-open countryside of northern Arizona. The house was a charming, two-story farmhouse tucked away on a quiet road, surrounded by towering pines and rolling fields. It wasn't lavish by any means, but it promised space, tranquility, and the kind of peace we had both longed for. At first, everything felt idyllic. The local community was friendly, and the slower pace of life was a welcome change from the constant hustle of the city. We spent our first few weeks settling in, unpacking boxes, repainting walls, and exploring every nook and cranny of our new haven. One of the features that initially caught our eye was the expansive, somewhat neglected basement. It wasn't uncommon for old houses like this to have a bit of clutter hidden away down there, and we assumed it would simply serve as extra storage for seasonal decorations and old furniture. A few weeks into our new life, I began noticing a peculiar electrical issue. As an electrician by trade, I was accustomed to diagnosing and fixing wiring problems, so when I saw that the lights on the second floor would frequently flicker and sometimes even trip the circuits, I set out to find the root cause. Most of the circuits were fine, but the issue seemed localized to a specific section of the house, primarily around the area above the basement. I figured it was simply an overloaded circuit, a remnant of outdated wiring that needed modernizing. One rainy afternoon, I decided to venture into the basement for a closer inspection. The space was cluttered with forgotten furniture, stacks of old boxes, and various odds and ends that previous occupants had left behind. As I methodically worked my way through the chaos, searching for the main breaker panel, my eyes caught something unusual in the far corner of the basement. Behind a pile of old wooden crates and a set of mismatched chairs was a heavy, industrial-looking metal door. It stood out like an anomaly in an otherwise disorganized room. The door was enormous, far taller and thicker than any door one would expect in a residential basement. Its surface was a dull, matte gray, with a robust lock embedded in the center. Intrigued, I approached it and examined the lock closely. Despite my familiarity with various security mechanisms, I had never seen one as complex as this. The door exuded an aura of mystery, as though it were meant to secure something far more significant than mere storage. Curiosity got the better of me, and I spent several minutes trying to open the door with nothing more than a firm push and a turn of the handle. It wouldn't budge. Frustrated and perplexed, I retraced my steps upstairs and began searching through drawers for any spare keys that the previous owners might have left behind. I sifted through old trinkets, forgotten mail, and even a dusty box labeled miscellaneous. After several fruitless minutes, I reluctantly accepted that I wasn't going to force it open on my own. Later that evening, I mentioned the door to Jordan while we were having dinner in our newly renovated kitchen. She listened intently, her eyes wide with a mix of concern and fascination. "Maybe it's just a built-in safe room or a storm shelter," she suggested in a tentative tone. I wasn't convinced. I recalled that when the realtor had shown Us the house, there was no mention of a secret room or any unusual features in the basement. With our budgets stretched thin from the move, neither of us was eager to invest a lot of money in remodeling or security upgrades, but the mystery of the door gnawed at me. Over the next several days, I found myself increasingly drawn to the basement. Every time I descended the creaky stairs, my mind kept returning to that metal door. I began noticing other small anomalies in the house as well, flickering lights in the hallways, odd creaks at odd hours, and items that seemed to move slightly out of place. At first, I chalked it up to the quirks of an old house settling into its new life. But deep down, a more unsettling thought took hold. What if someone had been living here long before we moved in? Unable to shake my mounting anxiety, I decided to call a locksmith the following week. Jordan was hesitant but eventually agreed that we needed professional help. The locksmith arrived on a crisp morning, his tools spread out on a workbench in the cluttered basement. He examined the lock on the mysterious door with practiced precision. After some deliberation, he remarked, "This is one of the most complicated locks I've ever seen. It looks like something you'd install on a high-security vault rather than in a regular home." His tone was both impressed and puzzled. He worked for nearly an hour, his brow furrowed in concentration, until finally he managed to unlock the door. I held my breath as the door creaked open to reveal a space that was completely unexpected. Inside, the room was set up like a small shrine or panic room. The walls were lined with old black and white photographs in ornate frames, many of which featured stern, unsmiling faces. Strange symbols and cryptic markings were etched into the plaster, their meaning lost to time. In the center of the room stood a single, worn-out armchair facing a blank wall. A thin layer of dust covered everything, as if the room had been sealed off for years. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. It was as if I had stumbled into someone's secret sanctuary. I noticed a small cot tucked into one corner, its bedding rumpled and stale. Empty chip bags, discarded water bottles, and other remnants of human presence were scattered around, confirming that someone, or something, had indeed occupied this hidden space. I retraced my steps, my mind racing with questions. Who had built this room, and for what purpose? Had they been living here in secret, hidden away behind an industrial-grade door in the basement of our house? I rushed upstairs and called Jordan into the room. She arrived a few minutes later, her face pale with shock. We examined the room together, our initial curiosity giving way to dread as we pieced together the unsettling clues. I immediately attempted to contact the previous owners, dialing the number provided by the realtor. To my frustration, the call went unanswered, and subsequent attempts were met with silence or a disconnected line. I then reached out to our realtor, who seemed equally baffled and promised to investigate further with the local authorities. That night, our home felt anything but a sanctuary. The discovery of the secret room had unsettled both of us to the core. We spent the evening huddled together in the living room, the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. Every creak, every shadow cast by the flickering lights, sent our imaginations into overdrive. We wondered if the person who had once occupied the room might still be lurking somewhere in the house. Our once comfortable new home now resonated with an eerie silence, punctuated only by the occasional sound of the wind outside. In the following days, the police visited our home to take a report. They carefully inspected the basement and the mysterious room, but their investigation yielded little more than speculation. They advised us to install additional security cameras and to remain vigilant, but as time passed, no further disturbances occurred. Gradually, a fragile sense of normalcy returned to our daily routine. We resumed our work, Jordan began reconnecting with her friends, and I continued with my electrical projects around the house. Yet, the memory of that secret room haunted me. Each time I passed the basement door, I felt a lingering chill. Then, one stormy evening, just as I was finishing up some repairs in the workshop, I heard an unmistakable sound from below, a metallic clatter echoing through the house. I hurried to the basement, my heart pounding in my chest, and found that the main door to the secret room had been left ajar. The photographs and symbols inside were undisturbed, but there was a new addition, a single, handwritten note taped to the door. It read, "Some secrets are meant to remain hidden." I called Jordan, who was equally shaken by the discovery. We debated what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront whoever had left the note, to demand answers for this invasion of our privacy. But another part of me feared that any further investigation might draw unwanted attention. In the end, we agreed to bolster our security, adding cameras, changing locks, and even installing motion sensors around the basement area. For a few days, there was no further sign of activity. The silence returned, and our home slowly settled back into a semblance of peace. Yet, the secret room and its cryptic message continued to loom over us like a dark cloud. I couldn't help but wonder about the previous owners and what secrets they might have harbored. Had they built this hidden room as a safe haven during troubled times, or was it something more sinister, a shrine to memories best left forgotten? As weeks turned into months, life resumed its course. I focused on my work as an electrician, and Jordan embraced the new opportunities in our rural community. But on quiet nights, when the wind howled outside and the old house creaked in the dark, I would find myself drawn back to the basement. I'd stand before the heavy metal door, its surface cold and impenetrable, and feel a mixture of fear, fascination, and regret. I knew that some mysteries were never meant to be solved, that the more you searched for answers, the deeper the darkness became. In a strange way, the secret room came to define our new beginning, a constant reminder that even in a place of fresh starts and hopeful dreams, shadows from the past can linger. I still haven't found out who left the note or what exactly transpired in that hidden chamber. The police investigation eventually went cold, and the previous owners remain elusive, their answers lost to time. I share this story not to incite fear, but as a testament to the idea that our homes, no matter how inviting they seem, can sometimes harbor secrets that defy explanation. Every time I pass by that basement door, I can't help but wonder if the mysteries it holds are truly meant to be uncovered, or if some doors are better left closed forever. When I finally decided to leave my cramped apartment in the city and buy a small house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, I thought I had found my sanctuary. I was in my late 20s, and this modest home was a hard-won achievement, a place where I could finally experience peace and independence. The house was unassuming, a single-story brick building with a small, overgrown garden and a neat front porch. I was excited about the new chapter, even though the silence was a bit unsettling at first after years of living in a bustling household. In the first few weeks, I settled into a comfortable routine. I spent my evenings reading on the porch and enjoying the solitude that came with living alone. However, one particular evening, as I was winding down with a cup of tea, I noticed movement in the window across the street. A shadowy figure was briefly visible behind partially drawn curtains, almost as if someone was watching. I dismissed it as my imagination, until it happened again the following night. Curiosity slowly grew into a nagging unease. I began to notice that this mysterious neighbor's house, which I had never really paid attention to before, seemed unusually dark even during the day. I recalled that I had never exchanged greetings with anyone there, and the house itself looked abandoned, its paint peeling, windows grimy, and a sagging porch that gave off a forlorn vibe. Despite this, I convinced myself that perhaps the occupant was just a recluse, someone who preferred to keep to themselves. One Saturday afternoon, I decided that it was time to introduce myself. I figured that a simple hello might break the ice and ease my concerns. I walked along the quiet street toward the old house, rehearsing a friendly greeting in my mind. When I reached the weathered front door, I knocked firmly. The silence that followed was unnerving, so I knocked a second time. After a few long moments, the door creaked open, and I was met with the sight of a gaunt, middle-aged man with hollow eyes and a tight-lipped expression. He said his name was Marcus, but his voice was low and monotone, and he barely acknowledged my presence before closing the door. That encounter left me feeling more disturbed than reassured. Over the next several nights, I began to observe Marcus from my window. He rarely left his house. But on the few occasions when I glimpsed him, his expression was one of intense, almost vacant scrutiny. Sometimes I even saw him move behind the curtains, as if he was deliberately watching me. My initial fear was replaced by a growing sense of paranoia. I started to wonder if he was stalking me. One cold evening, while I was sitting on my porch after a long day of work, I noticed something even more alarming. I saw a small, crumpled object lying on my front lawn near the edge of the garden. It was a woman's sock, faded and torn. A chill ran down my spine as I picked it up. I couldn't imagine how it might have ended up there. Had Marcus, or someone else, been entering my property? I couldn't shake the feeling that my privacy was being invaded. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I installed a motion-activated light at the edge of my yard. The first night it was activated, I was startled by a sudden burst of white light illuminating the entire garden. For a split second, I saw Marcus standing at the edge of his property, his figure half obscured by shadows. His eyes met mine through the glare of the light, and for a moment, I felt as if he was silently accusing me of something. The light then abruptly shut off, plunging everything back into darkness. Over the following days, my anxiety grew. I began documenting every unusual occurrence, notes of the times I saw Marcus at my window, blurry photos from my phone, and even the sound of distant footsteps outside my door at night. I even spoke with a couple of nearby neighbors, who admitted that they, too, had noticed strange behavior coming from Marcus's house. Yet no one seemed willing to confront him or bring the matter to the authorities. One night, when the air was particularly chilly and the wind howled through the empty street, I decided I couldn't live in fear any longer. I resolved to confront Marcus directly. I left a note on his door, politely introducing myself and asking if we could talk. The next morning, I found the note torn and crumpled, with the words "Stay away" hastily scrawled in dark ink. My heart sank. Clearly, whatever was happening on that side of the street was far more serious than I had imagined. That same evening, while I was preparing dinner in my kitchen, I heard a series of knocks on my front door. I froze, my mind racing with possibilities. Hesitantly, I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. I opened the door a crack, and a cold gust of wind blew inside. The door slammed shut before I could react, leaving me trembling with fear. I quickly retreated to the safety of my living room, where I sat in silence, listening for any further disturbances. A few nights later, as I sat alone on my couch, I heard the unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps outside. I grabbed my phone and dialed the local police, explaining my situation and my growing fear that Marcus might be trespassing on my property. The officer who answered promised to send someone over to check the area, but the response was delayed, and my nerves were fraying by the minute. Then, in the dead of night, I awoke to the sound of heavy footsteps echoing in the hall. I couldn't sleep, and in my dimly lit room, I saw a shadow moving slowly across the floor. My mind immediately flashed back to Marcus. Was he inside my house? Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone, ready to dial 911 once again. But before I could, the footsteps stopped abruptly. I lay there, heart pounding, until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains. That morning, I discovered muddy footprints near my back door, footprints that did not match my own, and which seemed to lead directly from the street into my house. I took pictures and reported everything to the police. The officers came, examined the footprints, and confirmed that there was no sign of forced entry elsewhere. They advised me to install additional security measures and to remain vigilant. Despite their reassurances, I felt my sense of safety shatter further. In the weeks that followed, my life became a constant battle between normalcy and terror. I rarely ventured out after dark, always double-checking every lock and keeping my blinds firmly closed. Marcus's presence became an unsettling part of my daily routine, whether it was his occasional appearance at my window or the feeling that his gaze was always fixed on me from the other side of the street. I even began to see him more frequently, his expression growing more menacing with each passing encounter. One fateful night, when the rain was coming down in sheets and the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls, I decided I couldn't take it any longer. I gathered my courage and stepped out onto my porch to confront him once and for all. I called out his name into the storm, determined to demand an explanation for his relentless surveillance. At first, there was no response, only the sound of the rain beating against the roof. Then, as if emerging from the darkness itself, Marcus appeared in the window of his dilapidated house. His eyes were cold and unblinking, and his face bore an expression of deep, unspoken anger. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. I could feel the tension in the air, heavy and oppressive. Before I could utter another word, the door behind him swung open violently, and out stepped a disheveled, elderly woman with wild eyes and a tangled mane of hair. Her presence was both shocking and inexplicable. She seemed to have come out of nowhere. Without a word, she lunged toward me, brandishing what looked like a kitchen knife. I barely had time to react as she screamed incoherently about someone stealing her child. In that instant, panic took over. I managed to wrestle the knife from her grasp and, in the chaos that ensued, I stumbled backward, my heart pounding like never before. I called out for help, my voice cracking with terror, and within moments, the flashing lights of a police car illuminated the dark street. Officers rushed to the scene, quickly subduing the intruder and escorting her away. I later learned that the woman was a troubled neighbor who had been living on the fringes of the community, and that Marcus had been her silent accomplice, silently watching while she played out her disturbing delusions. In the aftermath, I was left shaken and scarred by the experience. The police took my statement and assured me that both the woman and Marcus would be investigated. Yet, despite their efforts, the sense of violation and dread lingered long after the incident. I eventually moved out of that house less than a year later, unable to shake the memories of those harrowing nights and the feeling that my sanctuary had been invaded by darkness. Today, as I settle into my new home in a different, supposedly safer neighborhood, I can't help but reflect on how a place that was meant to be a fresh start became a source of relentless fear and uncertainty. I now lock every door twice and keep a vigilant eye on every window, forever wary of the shadows that might be watching. Some secrets, I've learned the hard way, are never truly left behind, and sometimes, the people you think you know can reveal the darkest parts of themselves when you least expect it.